kids are learning from influencers on TikTok with absolutely zero credentials in whatever they're teaching.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. The insidious ways in which technology may be harming our kids that we discussed in the previous episode, well, they are not new to this episode's guest, Forest Bronzan. Forrest is a veteran tech entrepreneur who, as co-founder and CEO of Digital Detox, is advancing initiatives to promote digital wellness in schools and homes. Forrest shares his insight and information on these initiatives now. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign, through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. And now, the interview.
So, I'm a father of two. My daughter is in first grade, my son's in fourth grade. And so, as a parent, once I had children, I was just much more aware of how much technology is impacting our lives
Mm,
parents, teens, kids, everyone. But going a little bit further back, my dear friend Levi Felix, he started this company called Digital Detox in 2012. And it was this very experiential live event company, right? Summer camps for adults and digital detox
all
retreats.
right.
And I was an early supporter and brought my company several years in a row. And unfortunately, Levi died of a brain tumor in 2017
Mm,
at 32. And all of his work kind of profoundly impacted how I think about the world and technology and my relationship with technology. And I had an opportunity to take over Digital Detox in 2020, 45 days before COVID. We had a event sold out and this great comeback story, and then that shut us
right.
down. So the last few years we've been focused a lot more on research and data, working with schools around the world, just to understand how can we navigate this. I mean, this is uncharted territory. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer of I'm passionate from a parent's
hmm
perspective, from a human perspective, and have just a deep history with several people that are really close to me that have been in this space for a long time.
In the United States, and I suspect it's the case in other countries, but I'm more familiar with how the United States has treated new technologies, new formats, and kids. Right. So obviously, we're really aware of some of the hearings that are going on around social media right now. But we've had hearings like this in Congress, really since the beginning of Congress. We've had people talking about, the evils of television, and that debate's gone on and gets brought up again, and got brought up again every 5 to 10 years since the invention of television. So, what do you mean by digital wellness?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. From video games to
Right.
TV to movie influencers, this isn't new. And one interesting thing with a lot of the hearings going on last week, at the end of the day, it's going to take a while for kind of fundamental change, I think,
Right.
to happen. Whether Meta is not going to just overnight change. That's not going to happen. And yeah, we're starting to see a lot of states propose new laws for parental consent or for age restrictions around social media. Maybe there's something at the federal level. COSA is being circulated right now. But I think that's going to take a while. And so at the end of the day, I think parents have the control to make some of those decisions in their own household for what
Right.
makes sense for their family and their ecosystem. We don't need to wait on some of these other elements. But to answer your question, in terms of digital wellness, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm not anti-tech. I love technology. I embrace it. I love playing some video games with my kids. We watch movies. We have movie night. We use AI. We we use it in a really healthy way. I think where it becomes problematic is when it's interrupting your normal equilibrium, your overall flow, and interrupting other responsibilities. So, take a child that is meeting all of their other expectations,
Hmm.
academics, social, extracurricular. That's a very different dynamic in terms of, the common question, how much screen time is okay, and should they be able to have a little bit more video games or movies or whatever it is, versus a child that's not doing any of those things. They're behind in their grades. They're not meeting their social development milestones. That answer is very different. So, I think the answer of, what does digital wellness mean? I think that really depends on the household, on the family, on the individual. For me personally, it's kind of leading my life in a way where I'm not letting technology dictate how I kind of go about my day to day. I use it to augment and enhance and
Mm.
to make things better, but I'm not going to let it overwhelm me and really interfere with my mental health.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you kind of understood the spirit of my question. I think that we no longer say things like, is a television bad? I mean, that's what
Right.
we were saying. Which was akin to saying, "Is book bad?" Well, it's a delivery system. It is a form or format, and it has a lot to do, obviously, with the content and with its concern, how it's consumed. And so I get really concerned because I know that you and I both see people in the space that say things like, screens are bad, and I just don't think that we are in a position to even if we believed, and I don't believe the science necessarily, that the screens by themselves are disruptive regardless of the content. Um, that is out of the barn. We're not getting rid of digital technology. In fact, the parents that I talk to, they'll say things like, "Well, I'll try to do something like limit my child's access to their phones or limit their access to computers to certain times, certain places." And they say things like, "Well, then I can't do my homework." Right? So the technology is there. So when you say it's using it to enhance your life, can you point to things or lines where the technology is helping versus hurting?
Yeah, no, great point. And to your other comment, yeah, I agree completely. At the end of the day, so many parents ask, what age to get a phone, and should we not
Right.
get a phone? Like, well, that's too broad of a question. What do they want the phone for? We
Right.
work with a lot of parents that have students that are into photography and videography, and they can't really afford a full-fledged DSLR camera or other pro equipment. Well, wow, the iPhone's a pretty great alternative to that. And if that's all you're using it for, oh my goodness, yeah, that could be beautiful. You could just have some really great creative outlets. So there's so much more to kind of the what
Right.
versus just the why. So in terms of ways that it's enhancing, so I'm actually doing an experiment right now, a 45-day experiment with kind of calibrating my phone and apps and how I'm using it. For me, like I'm big on audiobooks, for example.
Mhm.
So Audible. I'm a huge music buff. It's the guitars in the background. So it's hard to imagine for me, going completely analog and not having access to Spotify and Audible. Would I survive? Of course. Would the world not end? Absolutely. It would be fine. But like I enjoy that. Like I love listening to audiobooks. I'm listening to Adam Grant's new book right now. I listen to music throughout a lot of my day, whether it's in drives. I'm learning Spanish, and I have this great audio based Spanish app for that. And so those are things that I feel it enhances my life. It's not distracting. It's not taking me away from my other responsibilities, my other interpersonal connection at all. But without those items, it would be a much slower process and a less enjoyable process. So those are examples of very simple examples of ways that it's enhancing my life. We could get into much more granular examples of how are we thinking about AI and the medicine space, and how does that
Right.
kind of come back full circle and benefit when we're talking about advanced lipids, for example. But keeping things fairly rudimentary. I'd say a way that it's distracted
Mhm.
and kind of negatively impacted, and I'm making some changes on my personal devices right now, is kind of the impulse to check email, for example,
Mm.
or LinkedIn, and just that it's that habit, and it's that just built-in habit of like, okay, I'm gonna grab my phone, I'm gonna refresh email, I'm gonna check LinkedIn, whatever it is. So I've removed those apps from my phone right now, and it's really fascinating because I'm finding myself more productive. I have time when
Mhm.
I could focus at my office on whatever I need to do. I don't need to refresh LinkedIn or refresh email in between my walk from the kitchen to the bedroom, right? And so just little changes like that, making things a little bit more difficult. I don't know if you've read James Clear's book on atomic habits. I mean, there's little fundamental things that you could do to really tweak. So for me personally, those were things that were kind of detracting from my life. If we go back to 2020, yeah, like I fell in a little bit of a spell of doom scrolling and going down the rabbit hole, and I just need to be deliberate about, I'm not going to allow myself to do that if it's unnecessary. Right?
So you've been working with an organization, Camp Light, that is, I think, help me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it's kind of designed to help parents do a little bit about what we're talking about, which is understand how to make technology work for their families in a positive way and make better decisions so that it doesn't impact them in a negative way. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. We launched a couple months ago, and it's part community discussion room. So
Hmm.
picture like a private Reddit or Facebook group without ads or algorithms. So this parent to parent discussions based on grade level, and then it's part expert led content. We just have some breathtaking mental health professionals on the team and guests that come in to address a certain topic, answer questions, etc. So yeah, it's a platform for parents to navigate this crazy world of raising kids with tech.
And I already like the fact that when I've asked you questions about what healthy technology habits look like for a family, you immediately look at your own habits, which I think is a really good sign because that's not with a lot of parents that I've talked to and a lot of workshops that I've given. That's not the feedback I get. We hear a lot of people complaining about about how their children are using technology, quite oblivious to the fact that even while they're asking me that question, their eyes haven't left their own device, right? So, how do you, what do you do, or can you, in a platform like Camplight, kind of inject that outside perspective? Because this stuff has been studied. Sociologists and social psychologists have looked at this. How do you inject that outside perspective so it's not just an echo chamber?
Yeah, I want to chat about that. And I really appreciate you making that comment. It's interesting when we do surveys and work with a lot of students, one of the common themes that comes up is, my parents are hypocritical. They're telling
Yeah.
me to spend less time on the screen and they're just looking through Facebook reels on the couch and ignoring me. So that's very common. And when we work with parents directly and kind of bring that up, in some cases it's eye opening, like, oh my goodness, wow, like I actually am the culprit here. In other
Right.
cases, it's very defensive. So it all depends on the parent. I think a lot of that really comes down to modeling behavior at an early
Mm.
age. So, it's very different trying to kind of make changes and habit change when your kids are in high school. But, if we could start early modeling behavior, talking about the behavior, and again, like that doesn't necessarily mean that you're never on your phone. There's times that
Right.
you need to be on your phones, times you need to look at your screen, but having that talk track conversation, here's why I'm looking this up. It's kind of important for this situation or why I'm taking this call. In terms of Camp Light, yeah, like so we take a very pragmatic approach. We're not this fear-based. I won't name some other groups, but
Right.
we're not this fear-based group that is trying to lure people in as a solve for their deepest, darkest fears. Rather, back to one of your earlier points, at the end of the day, like this is the world we live in. Technology, like it or not, kids need to deal with AI and chat GPT
Right.
in high school. Like it or not, there's ed tech and there's learning games and there's pornography. All of that's real. And no matter how much you might wish it away, it's just not going to happen. So we take an approach of like, well, let's deal with this. Let's deal with this head on and approach this in a very practical way. And from Camplight's perspective, we're not a church. We're not dictating here's the right and
Mm.
wrong way. Rather, we want to arm parents with what we know, what we don't know, what the data shows, what the data doesn't show. So then you can make the best decision for your family and your personal situation. So in some cases, that's hearing from other parents in the community, not hearing from Camplight at all, but a parent might post this question. This teacher is introducing this particular app. I have some concerns. Has anyone else seen this? And you hear from parents around the country, around the world too. In other cases, we're bringing in experts. We have Dr. Gupta this Friday talking about the link between pediatric diabetes and
Mm.
technology. So, if parents going through that, they might kind of understand the pros, the cons, what to deal with. Dr. Hughes is talking about what the data shows and doesn't show around the link between ADHD and screen use. And so all of that's just to arm you with all the best resources, and then also kind of coaching you how to think through some of these decisions. Another huge part that we focus on is that communication. So much of this comes down to how you're communicating with your spouse or your partner, how you're communicating with your kids, how you're communicating with other parents, with the school. And I can't underscore this enough. It is so critical to have that open dialogue, especially in the household. But being able to know how to approach people outside of the household in certain situations. I'll give you a great example. We have a whole section all around cyberbullying and
Mhm.
bullying, and kind of helping parents navigate. And no parent ever wants to go through that. That's a very intricate element, though, when it's, do I approach the school or do I not? In some cases that
Right.
could escalate the situation, but in other cases you need to nip that very early. So we try to just help people think about it in a different way, from different perspectives, and arm them with some great communication skills to hopefully improve.
And the other thing that I like about how you've been talking about it too is really from a utility perspective. Why am I using this technology? Even in describing your own use, you didn't say, here's the apps I use. You said why you were using them. And I think it's critical in these discussions, especially around children, to really look at why they're using what they're using and not what. And unless we have those discussions, to your point, a child just modeling an adult behavior will say, "Oh, that device must be really important." It gets all of their attention without ever understanding the why of that. With and this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. Pet peeve might not be the correct word, but like, how do you vet the people that you let have access to the parents in Caplight? You mentioned some of the speakers you have coming up.
How do we vet, like, our team and our mental health
Well, the
professionals?
people that are who do these workshops or things for Camp Light, how do you vet them before you give them access to that audience?
Yeah, so it's all curated through us. I mean, if you're a parent signing up through Campline, it's a private member group. It's
Mhm.
a paid subscription, so you can't just go on and randomly post and troll. So it's generally parents that are pretty committed to this conversation. So everyone's fairly like minded, and our community values, we're just there's zero tolerance for internal bullying or
Right.
shaming or anything like that. We're there to support each other. In terms of our team, yeah, like, we have several really awesome mental health pros, that are regulars, and then we have some guest experts. Sometimes we want to bring different perspectives from our own as well, because that's all part of our ethos, is getting, if it was just one perspective, and that's not really a well
Mhm.
balanced approach to making a decision for your household. But yeah, I mean, it's part process of vetting some of the content that they've had. Does it align with just our overall approach to the world and how we're thinking about
Right.
technology? And if it doesn't, is there an academic benefit of having that alternative perspective on? And then we have background checks, and we're looking into some of the other sources that they've posted content on. We're not just randomly, you can't just, an expert can't just randomly come into
Okay.
Camplight. It's an internal vetting process. Usually goes through myself, Dr. Hughes, Dr. Mothner on the team. So it's a lot of kind of peer reviewed folks in the space that we know through several connections, that are pretty well known.
I bring that up only because having been in the bullying space for a long time now, there's very few spaces, um, like bullying and cyberbullying that have attracted more amateurs. It's really odd. Like I've seen and I've been working with kids for a long time, but even issues like obesity, even issues like substance abuse, other things that kind of come in waves where we find ourselves all of a sudden we're really concerned about this topic, even though that topic might have been around for a while. All of a sudden with bullying and cyberbullying, a lot of people were out there and going on the speaker circuit and raising their hand to present that just had ideas. They hadn't done any studying, they hadn't done any research, they hadn't
Sure.
right, and they just had a good idea for something maybe that worked for them or that they saw worked for somebody else. And too often those ideas can be kind of rather harmful. So it's interesting. So I'm glad that you get to vet it. One of the things,
Well, on that
yeah,
note, I mean, what you just mentioned, I mean, that's most of social media.
yeah,
That's most influencers, and we had this discussion a couple days ago. With the digital wellness influencers out there, it's pretty much anyone with an opinion that happens to be a parent, and then
mhm,
has received some following. No data behind it. There's a couple very prominent ones, and literally their credentials are they read a book, and they have a kid,
Yeah.
and that's great. I think it's helpful to share opinions, but I think it becomes very dangerous when you're a parent, whatever it is, whether it's digital wellness or dieting or exercise, and you're really looking at the vanity metric of how many followers do they have? Does that kind of give some level of social approval? Thus, let me trust what they're saying, and there's not much to back that up. So yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that's scary, not only for adults but for kids. I
Yeah.
mean, kids are learning from influencers on TikTok with absolutely zero credentials in whatever they're teaching.
Right.
So it's I think that's one of the less discussed major concerns. Yes, there's horrendous cases of very dark stuff that happens, but the less dark but equally impactful is learning about the world from people that should never be in a position to teach what they're teaching.
Yeah. I mean, and it seems like one of the things that attracts young people, and this has been written about as well, to some of these influencers, is the fact that the influencers seem really good at listening to their followers. Like this is a
Sure,
big
sure.
drawing point. And you've mentioned this multiple times already about the importance of listening and sharing. And so, one of the things we know, just because you were talking about cyberbullying, is one of the things that kids are afraid of, and this is in the research about sharing that they've witnessed or that they've been, subjected to cyberbullying with a parent, is not knowing what that parent's going to do. That the parent is just going to fly off and not listen to what the kid thinks should be done, or what, or the nuance of the situation. So the kid is afraid, if I share with the adult's going to make it worse, because they're not going to listen. They're going to try to solve, right? So that gets scary.
Well, yeah, that's not just cyberbullying, that's anything.
Yeah.
And one thing we really encourage parents to do from an early age is create that circle of trust where they could talk to you about anything, without the fear of taking away advice. So, for
Yeah.
example, outside of cyberbullying, there's a lot of students that will go to their parents and say, like, "Oh my goodness, I saw this deep fake or this news that was really disturbing or this porn image or whatever it was." And the parent will just take the phone
Right.
away and shut everything down. And so then now they're hesitant to have that conversation because they don't want to lose their connection and their only source of connectivity with their friends. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. Whether it's cyberbullying or anything, parents need to uh, do better at listening, supporting, asking questions, and not just going into solve mode.
Yeah, some of the interesting things I've seen some academics working on is ways to mediate those conversations, almost to put those kind of conversations in an escrow, so that you can, put your comment or concern out there to your parent, and they can live with it and like be kind of forced to have a beat before they act on it. So it's kind of interesting that and that's sometimes being used with technology, which is also ironic. We're going to use technology to help us talk about technology, which might be a problem, right? So there's a little bit of an irony there. Um,
No, and we talk a lot about that, and it's interesting. While Camp Light's focused on helping parents navigate raising kids
right.
with technology, at the core, I mentioned this. A lot of it comes down to helping parents communicate better, right?
Yeah.
And have some of these tools to create those relationships, and a lot of that then dovetails into technology, but a lot of it doesn't. It's just how can we listen better? How can we kind of just be a better partner in the family?
It is. I mean, the irony isn't lost on me. I've been involved in initiatives not dissimilar from Camp Light. Like for example, I was involved in trying to help give foster parents more information about the kids that they were caring for, so that they could use that information in moments of crisis. And the biggest pushback I got, which was totally understandable, is, hey, if you have a kid in crisis, I don't want the parent looking at a phone. And yet, if they don't have that information, they might make really bad decisions, and they might make the situation worse. So these are things that we're all negotiating for sure. The You've also developed a Dora score to kind of help people understand the extent to which they really do need to evaluate, what technology, how it's impacting their family. Tell me a little bit about the Dora score.
Yes, we launched Dora. What was that last April or so. We're almost at a year now, and it was really because there's so many quizzes out there that
Mm,
are silly quizzes. It's something you'd see at the back of a magazine, and those are fun, little personality quizzes. But we wanted to create a more sophisticated measure that, yeah, it's quick. It's 5 minutes. We put a lot of time and validation rounds into this. We brought in, some of the top psychometricians and mental health folks, some on our team, some external, to really thoughtfully put together this assessment that can give you a mathematical score of how much technology is impacting your life. So it's based on a score of 0 to 120. There's 4 different risk levels. And what we've found, this was actually surprising, is that just the questions have been eye opening for
mm,
folks. We have tons of people writing in saying, just going through this, I didn't realize I was doing some of these habits.
yeah.
And that just opened up my eyes. So Adore has been great. We've had participants, I think, from over 90 countries now, and it's becoming one of the leading metric for digital overuse. And we had a lot of requests from schools to implement it, and so in August we adapted it and we created a new measure just for students, Student Dora, and it could only be taken if it's administered through the school, just so we have complete control over knowing that it's
Mhm.
actual teens taking it. And that launched in Boston in the fall, and we're starting to see schools adopt that around the country. So we're gathering just a ton of data from a student's perspective, from adults' perspective. It's fascinating.
Yeah, the act of changing a research subject through the process of the research, right? It's sometimes called watching bias or testing bias. It's really interesting, and it leads to my next question because just by having a Dora score, you're not going to always be able to understand the impact it's had on people, because those questions themselves are changing their behaviors, which is really interesting. But like, how do you know if Camplight is working for the families that are using it?
So switching from Dora to
Yeah.
Camplight, yeah. I mean, again, like we launched 2.5 months ago, so it's very early. We've had 0% churn, so
Mm,
no one is unsubscribed and left. So that's a good sign, right? And we have some qualitative. We'll do focus groups with members to understand how can we improve. But yeah, right now we don't have a quantitative metric of you joined Camplight, and then all of a
right.
sudden this has changed in your family. We're just not there yet. Maybe at some point, once we're around a little bit longer, we'll be able to kind of show some before and afters. But just in terms of kind of the sentiment and the feedback from the parents, it's been helpful because we cover just a broad range. Again, we have a lot of members that are just had a baby, or they might have a
Mm,
1 or 2 year old, and they're wanting to create a different environment in their household and be really proactive about this, all the way to middle school or high school parents that are dealing with something very, very severe. On the bullying front, this is fascinating. And with other things with technology, it might be something that you talk about at soccer with another parent, right? Like, oh, are you what apps are you on? What video games? How much screen time do
right.
you have? But with something like bullying, it's much more sensitive in a lot of cases. And what we found is parents are less likely to feel comfortable talking about that at soccer in
Mm,
passing, even on like a public Reddit or a Facebook group. And so, Camplight provides a safe space where it's other parents that know exactly what you're going through, and to support you in that safe space. So we're really excited about the value we might be able to
mm,
add to help parents navigate that, and not only improve the situation for their child, but for themselves. Again, like it's so stressful as a parent going through that and navigating any of this. We want to help set you up for success and make you be as healthy as possible. But to answer your question, yeah, like right now it's more qualitative
mhm,
feedback of members saying, yes, this is for me. I'm learning a lot. Some members saying, well, here's where
mm.
I want to see more from Camplight. But again, no one's left yet, so that's a good sign.
Well, I think that's a good sign. I think that all of us have rules of thumb about how we know something might be working even before we get a measure around it. And so I think that was more my question than anything.
I think the challenge with Camplight is twofold. One, again, we don't sell based on fear, and so
Right.
if we were this fear group, we would have 200,000 members by now, right? But we're not, and that's not our voice and not our position. But then second, like it is a commitment. Like this stuff takes work,
Mm,
and a lot of parents, they don't have the time or the energy to put in the work for this, right? So it's work on two fronts. Like being part of Camplight or any type of group like this, you're learning, you're communicating, you're connecting with others. But then the real work happens at home. You have to implement that, and you have to adapt that and synthesize that for the family. And so a lot of folks, whether they just don't have the ambition to do that, or due to their life circumstances and their jobs, they just don't have the time. It's definitely more work. It's a lot more work than just scrolling Instagram and
mm.
watching a 20-second reel.
Yeah, I mean, my research with parents has suggested that they really do want to interact with other parents in the way that you described, but there is so much pressure. Nobody wants to be seen as a bad parent. And that's like that's a principal motivating fear in a lot of parental in-person interactions is I there are things that I want to ask about, but I'm afraid that I'll be seen as a bad parent if I don't say this correctly or if they don't react to what I'm saying in a certain way. So I do like the idea that mediating those interactions offers kind of a freedom and a buffer to that. So that could be very, very powerful. So where do you think?
Yeah, we're a no judgment, no shame
Yeah,
environment, and as we scale, that's more moderation to keep on tabs. But yeah, that's a really great point, and specific example like parents are. It's difficult for them to just ask a question about screen time. Like,
yeah.
is it okay if my son watched 9 hours this weekend? Because then you have a lot of shaming from other parents. That's a great example of where Camp Light kind of augments, the toxic environments of
Mhm.
Facebook groups and some Instagram shaming. That's not what we're about at all.
I have so many examples of that because of, you know, been doing focus groups with parents for decades now, and getting parents to talk about the digital behaviors in any media behaviors of the people in their household. They always lied to me. They always,
Sure.
always, always, because they didn't want to say, "Yeah, my kid watched 2 hours of TV and was on their computer for 3 hours," and which we knew from the stats was happening. That's what was going on, but they refused to say that because it seemed bad, regardless of the content, regardless of how it was consumed, regardless of who was there with them. So I applaud you in figuring that out. Where do you hope this is all going? Like, what is your big goal for all of this, Forest?
With Camp Light or just the space in general and everything
Well,
going on?
and I don't mean to confuse those 2. I don't mean to confuse the Dora score, although when I took it kind of in getting into your world as a way to understand, I believe it was presented to me as a way to understand whether or not Camplight was right for me or there were tools in there. But obviously, you describe your interest in the space more as a movement and not as individual products. And so what are you hoping to achieve with all of these different things that you're working on?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. And in the big scheme, I think we're moving very quickly. Just the world in
Mhm.
general on identifying some of the challenges with social media, the impacts of technology. I mean, if we look at, I was on a podcast a couple days ago, we were talking about if you look at seatbelts in cars, it took I think several
Yeah,
decades. You could fact check me later, but several decades for car manufacturers to install seatbelts. Smoking, I think it took California 100 years to increase the age for smoking tobacco
right,
after we had decades of research, right? And
right.
so we're in the big scheme of things, we're very early in this thing called social media and technology. I mean, it's very, very early with how we're using it today,
Mhm.
and we're already seeing dozens of states file lawsuits. We're seeing congressional hearings. We're seeing just a lot of movement, a lot of conversation.
Right.
So I think I'm optimistic with that. In terms of kind of Camp Light and Dora, yeah, like we want to help as many parents as possible that want help improving this, right? And I agree with what you said earlier that there's a lot of parents that do, but we find that there's a lot of parents that they don't care. They,
Mm,
they just and it doesn't mean they're a bad parent, but they don't care about this. It's like, okay, yeah, just let them be on TikTok for 12 hours a day in first grade. Like kids will be
right.
kids, and they're not as motivated to put in the work to understand all the different variables so they can make better decisions. There's more parents that are into it than not. But yeah, with Dora, we launched Dora as sort of this experiment, and then it took off, and 90 plus countries later, eventually we want that to be an evolving metric that people could use to then come back to and say, okay, well, how have I changed my habits? How have I improved with my own life? And let's see if that Dora score could eventually be the FICO score of digital wellness.
Mm,
That would be really interesting if that could add value. In terms of Camp Light, again, we're less than 90 days in. So it's really too early to see where that goes. There's a world that we transition much more to bowling just because it's such an impact on
yeah.
parents and it's very, very isolated.
Frightening.
So
Right.
yeah, it's frightening. And it's number two concern for parents before it even happens,
Yeah.
right? outside of kind of child predators and data privacy. So if you were to tell me, looking 5 years in the future, Camp Light is this platform all to support bullying, I'd say, yeah, that might be an interesting path. Right now, we're pretty broad because it is an important and broad topic. It's niche, but it's broad, right? I mean, it's from when you have a child through high school and beyond. There's going to be something changing with technology, and we want to kind of guide you along the way. So our perfect example would be a parent that starts with us, and the kid's a couple years old, and then they're with us for 10, 20 years to get them through high school, and we're with you every step of the way to navigate all the things that are changing. What we know now about social media is going to change by the time that
Yeah.
same child is in high school. TikTok's not even going to be here in 6, 7 years probably. So
And I think that there's a lot of people that, like, when they heard you say that, breathed a sigh of relief. But before, so I want
well,
to,
be careful what you wish for, though. Be
yeah,
careful what you wish
what's
for.
going to come next, right? Because we were afraid of Snapchat, and then Snapchat gave way to TikTok. It's and that takes us into a very different and longer conversation, I think.
But I think an important point on this, if we go back to, I graduated high school in
Yeah,
2001, I'll age myself a little bit. When I was in elementary and middle school, I would talk on the phone with
yeah.
friends all weekend. And I remember my parents saying, Why are you spending so many hours talking on the phone?" Eh, Parents would give a lot right now to have their
Yep.
kids actually talk on the phone and have conversations. So be careful what you wish for.
It was a trope. It was a trope of in movies and in television all throughout the 70s and 80s of the teen that never got off the phone. And then it became
Right.
a trope of the kid in the Walkman that never took the headphones off, right? That was in everything that you saw. And so, to your point, it's there's always going to be new technology. There's always going to be something else that we're concerned about, and we have to keep that perspective, which was kind of the point of my comments earlier. Is we have to learn from that and go, okay, so maybe it's not the evil that is a screen, but maybe it's how they use it and how we get a good experience out of it without vilifying. So we're out of time today, and this was a path that we could have gone down. But I just want to thank you for your work in this space. It sounds like you're doing some really wonderful things, and I really appreciate it. So thanks, and thanks for being on Talking About Kids.
I appreciate the time today. Thank you.
That was Forest Bronzan. For more information about Forest and Digital Detox, please visit talkingaboutkids.com. From there, you also can find out about upcoming episodes, suggest a topic, learn more about me and my books, or submit your questions for future guests. Our theme song is by The Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans. And the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.